one of the things I love about ZEG is just how multidisciplinary it is. And I think this next session is a great example of that. Because we're going to be talking all about architecture and buildings and the power that the built environment around us has to solve social problems, trust, inequality, social injustice. And where better to talk about that than in Tbilisi, Georgia, a place where its layered history is really spoken through its buildings and its built environment. And you may not realize, but the space we're in right now used to be the Wrestling Federation in Soviet Georgia. And what a beautiful kind of story that this building has been repurposed to fight a different battle around connection and bringing people together. We are really honored to be joined by the legendary Chilean architect, Alejandro Aravena, who has a huge body of work that I'm sure we will get into. And he will be joined for the second time today on this stage, New Yorker editor and author Susan Morrison. Please welcome them to the stage.
Wrestling, huh? Really puts things in perspective here. Hello. When I came here today, having read up on Alejandro's work, I thought that we were going to be talking about architecture as activism. But after chatting with him for a few minutes at lunch, I realized that he has such a vastly wider perspective on the world than that. It's an epic perspective on what architects and artists can do to solve all different kinds of social problems. I mean, frankly, I pretty much threw away all my notes because his vision is so much bigger than I realized. And we were talking at lunch about, an architect's or artist's ability to try to take on drug cartels. So shall we start with that first mixed slide?
Okay. So
the slides are a little random. We're kind of playing, it's kind of a quiz show. We don't really know what's coming up. We're just going to wing it as they come up. Okay.
So, hello, good afternoon. In principle, that's the title. At some point should be the conclusion that we need a different narrative and different epic and storytelling. That's why I was interested in this festival. It's outside architecture. We go there through the means of architecture in the office, but the goal is somewhere in here, going from belongings to prove value, a noun, to belonging, a verb. And it's based on an article in the New York Times that never saw the light of the day. And hopefully we will weave into what connects Kim Kardashian, narco drug cartels, the riots in Chile that led to the attempt to rewrite the constitution, the reconstruction after the wildfires last year in Chile, and how housing can be a way to enter from architecture a non-architectural conversation.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how you think artists and architects can, I mean, you were talking about how in Chile and other places, the rule of the jungle has become the norm and the rule of law is, barely paid attention to. So what can you do? What can we do?
So there's the following slide is a 3-minute video excerpt from Bardo, the film by González Iñárritu, from minute 59 to the hour and 2 minutes. And it's a fictional interview of a narco from a documentary filmmaker. And I think this is the best explanation we've ever found to understand this new species that grew in our peripheries for the last decades. And the conflicts that we're having, that somehow for which the city has been the incubator, may have the most precise explanation in this film. So the same way there's a story that is able to produce an accurate diagnosis, we may need this type of stories to come up with some cures for these challenges that we're facing. So let's take a look at this film of what are these new species, what are the new codes in society, which is completely different from the rule of law. No, we need the sound.
La corazón. Para nosotros es la comida diaria, tirados en la fosa común. Aquí en la cárcel, nadie puede entrar y matarme, pero yo puedo mandarles matar a ustedes allá afuera. Yo era pobre, invisible. Ustedes me negaron atención durante décadas, y ahora los tengo agarrados de los huevos. Nosotros somos hombres bomba. En las Villa Miseria hay millones de hombres bomba. Estamos en el centro mismo de lo insoluble. Ya somos una nueva especie. Ya somos otros bichos diferentes a ustedes.
¿Qué debimos haber hecho?
Ustedes los intelectuales se la pasan hablando de lucha de clases, de marginalidad, y entonces llegamos nosotros. Ya no hay más proletarios, o infelices, o explotados. Hay una tercera cosa creciendo ahí afuera, cultivándose en el barro, educándose en el más absoluto analfabetismo, escondido en los rincones de la ciudad. Está usted delante de una especie de posmiseria.
¿Pero qué es lo que cambió en las periferias?
Lana. Ahora tenemos millones. Y ustedes son el Estado quebrado, gobernado por incompetentes.
¡A huevo!
¿Me entiendes? Nosotros tenemos métodos ágiles de gestión. Y ustedes son lentos, burocráticos. Nosotros no tememos a la muerte. Ustedes mueren de miedo. Nosotros estamos bien armados. Ustedes tienen calibre 38. Nosotros estamos en el ataque. Ustedes a la defensa. Ustedes tienen la manía del humanismo. Nosotros somos crueles, sin piedad. Ustedes nos han transformado en superstars del crimen. Nosotros los tenemos de payasos. Nosotros somos ayudados por la población de las ciudades miseria. Por miedo o por amor. Ustedes son odiados. Ustedes son regionales, provincianos, nacionalistas, corruptos. Tenemos 50 millones de gringos adictos. Nuestras armas vienen de fuera, del gabacho. Somos globales. Nosotros no nos olvidamos de ustedes. Son nuestros clientes. Ustedes nos olvidan en cuanto pasa el susto de la violencia que provocamos.
So, just to establish for the audience for a minute, the reason that we were talking about this, the narcos and their power, and to link it to architecture, is Alejandro was telling me about how after the Chilean wildfires last year, it was these people, the money of the drug cartels, that wanted to take on the rebuilding, and and this is basically what you want to replace with good, responsible architecture that's actually going to help people. But anyway, talk some more about this tribe. I mean, it's really interesting.
So I don't know if you got the subtitles, but narcos arrive fast. They're efficient for whatever necessity or need is in a society. So they're extremely accurate to identify vulnerabilities and fragilities and then supply what states cannot provide in an efficient way. But before there, I wanted to start because when we landed here with my wife on the way from the airport to the hotel, at some point we were behind the protest. So I guess that the idea of the protest from a country that has been going through dictatorship but also protest made some sense. So I included a couple of slides regarding what we went through in Chile starting on October 18th, 2019. It was a raise of maybe 2 cents in public transportation, and the school students decided to this kind of civil disobedience movement to just no pay for the extra fee. The day after, our pride in the country, subway, was burned. But in addition to that, what we saw on the streets was a level of anger that was somehow a social ticking time bomb that we identified decades before that was just expressed on the streets. At some point, why it's so difficult is there's a legitimate anger, but it was combined with the perfect chaos that narcos would like to create so that they can control territory. In the end, it's a war on territory. So, interestingly enough, for example, you see Rage Against the Machine tour was using the picture of the riots in Santiago. Not that different. I took this picture from Google yesterday. There's something in the people described in the video, those that have nothing to lose. The walking bombs are called by González Iñárritu. So to resist a bully, you don't go out and make a protest that is civilized. I guess you have to go beyond that, and for that, the people that have nothing to lose are the front line. And this is when narcos began to be mixed, a new epic with something that was, in a way, useful, at the same time extremely dangerous if you allow for that mix to take place. So because this was combined, it was not a protest anymore, sackings and lootings, and then you can easily talk about police repression, but then when narcos attack the police, they don't follow any rule. So this becomes a moment where chaos is perfect. In any case, we as a society were able to channel the anger, and 1.2 million people in the capital went out basically to say, and the way out was, well, there's a gap between our legal frame and what is legitimate. The Constitution was written under Pinochet, so the society felt, well, we have to have a different set of rules for how to live together. So do we vote to keep the Constitution or we reject the Constitution? And to make a long story short, 80% of the country voted to rewrite the Constitution. We elected some people. They were too far into the left. 62% rejected the text. It went back to the far right. The far right obviously created a very radical text that was rejected again. So right now, we're with the same Pinochet constitution ruling us. And this, again, creates the conditions, and sorry to have taken some time. Now I go back to a year ago, February 2nd, 2024. And I think there's a video that explains, no, there's before, afterwards there's a video. Just some images for you to understand the level of the catastrophe.
So tell us what happened in the wake of this devastation in terms of how many people lost their homes and how it was handled by the government.
Around 15,000 units were burned, 150 people died, 10,000 hectares burned. Of course, again, the military, so whenever we have a natural disaster, there's a questioning of what is order.
And whose responsibility it is.
I may skip this, but when you have this context, this is a flyer, it was not in the wildfires, it's in a different slum that we're working. The translation basically is, it starts by, this is not a threat. We need you to contribute with 200 euros a week so that we can all live in peace. Well, this is a parallel state. And I think this is an important picture because here in the front, we were called to help in the reconstruction of the city. So in here is where the state operates. So you have to apply for a budget, identify what is the right policy, how to arrive fast. In the meantime, over there is what you were mentioning, narcos arriving with envelopes with cash, financing the reconstruction right away. So somehow we had to find, as architects, a way to operate fast enough so that the trade-off is not rule of law, you receive my help, and then we lose it to the law of the jungle.
And so the idea of the narcos is coming and building these houses with envelopes of cash was to basically win more soldiers for themselves, to win their loyalty.
Then you have an entire parallel economy when the narcos take over, so the laundry, the cooking, the security, right, the soldiers, everything, it's in this parallel state. But
right,
they help people, so in
right,
the end, healthcare is taken care by them. So this is the tricky part. I think next one is a video of 2 minutes or something that explains the project, and then we can move ahead.
On February 2nd, 2024, conditions were ideal to start a fire. Around noon, 4 sources were intentionally activated. 5 hours later, the fire reached the city. Chile suffered the biggest and most lethal fire of its history. Once again, the country was going to face the difficulty of rebuilding fast and good. Fast, not only due to the drama of the victims, but to fight the pressure of narcos financing early on the reconstruction. And good, because families were rejecting emergency shelters. In El Olivar, a majority of the damaged units were built following a law of the 80s in which 4 families shared a 13 by 18 meters plot. 35 years later, the current law forbids to rebuild what was there with public funds. To solve these knots, by the first month, we presented the municipality with a building that we treated as a big house for 4 middle-class families. In April, we validated the proposal with the families. Together with the municipality, we identified a way to finance early a pilot that could then be escalated by the proper public departments. To accelerate the construction, we used a state-of-the-art steel concrete prefab system, able to be mounted in 24 hours. Finally, on January 20th, the big house started its journey to El Olivar. A year represented an eternity for the families, but was a record to build permanent housing. This experience proves that when the state wants, it can rebuild fast and good.
That was fascinating. I think one of the phrases that jumped out at me in that last bit was, if the state wants. So how do you and your firm, in the face of the narcos building these quick, bad things, how do you get the municipality on your side to do it the right way against the pressure of these rich drug lords? How does that must be as difficult as the design itself.
I think that at this point, we have accumulated enough experience in other disaster recovery in Chile. So in 2010, we have an 8.8 Richter scale earthquake plus tsunami. So we were called to help in the reconstruction of our entire city. So we knew how to channel more or less efficiently public resources, and including the people in the discussion of how a city would be rebuilt. And because of that, now we've been called to other moments. But I don't know if you noticed in the video, because it's hard from here to see, but in the dates, February was the fire, March we already had the design, April we had meetings with the family, and we had to jump until January with everything in place. How to navigate the public investment system is by far more difficult than what we had to do as architects. And that is also knowledge. I guess that at this point, we were trying to approach, okay, Ministry of Housing wasn't working. The Ministry of the Interior, they have funding for disaster relief. It's faster, but they don't have scale. So maybe the Ministry of Finance provided, so it was a kind of funding engineering to be able to have the prototype in place. The point is that it proved that if you want, it can be done. That was the whole point, to have something built that you can point out, it's possible.
And do you think that the people who were being swayed by the narcos with their envelopes of cash and the quick houses were persuaded? I mean, they're the ones that you want to persuade as well.
Well, the whole thing is full of stories, so maybe that's why I'm interested in this festival. When we were meeting with the families, we were told by the group of this neighborhood that when we left, we meaning the professionals, or when the municipality left, or when the minister left, the narcos were waiting outside whatever the meeting place was, and then in a car with a loudspeaker, they will saying or threatening the neighbors, if you accept the help of the state, we will burn your houses. So again, how to navigate the law of the jungle. I mean, you see there that you have a possibility, but then the strength, or let's say the bully wins. So that's why there's not going to be one single tool. We will have to elaborate as many tools as possible. This is only one, but this is part of the complexity of the problem.
Well, one of the big ideas that your firm has pioneered is this idea of incremental housing, where you build, and I don't know if that's the way you did it here, where you build half a house. You build the basic infrastructure of a house, and then you leave it to the people to build the rest of it, so that they're fully invested in it emotionally, physically, financially, and it's such a moving and brilliant concept, but one that I think would not necessarily seem self-evident to people in need. So how do you go about persuading them, we'll do this much, you do the rest?
Okay, so I may jump through these slides. This is in Venice now. It's a net zero concrete, but we may come back if somebody is interested. But let's move to the incremental housing. I mean, incrementality as an antidote against scarcity.
So basically...
Okay. Sorry, here it is. So, I think this is important in terms of context. I don't know exactly the case in Georgia, but this, I mean, whenever we do a lecture in, let's say, in Europe or in the US, when we say social housing, and actually if I Google it in English, this is what comes out from my algorithm. But if I Google it in Spanish, vivienda social, this is what comes out. So when we say social housing in Chile, in the back of our minds, it's a complete different scenario from what is understood in Europe, for example. And in that scenario, going back to how were we able to convince people, we didn't have to do anything. We started from facts, and in the previous gathering across the road, a lot of a discussion about facts and the social media was discussed. In our case, facts were, and still are, with public funding, a country like Chile, that is not the poorest in the world, can build, in the best of the cases, around 40 square meters. That's fact number one. When you go out to the peripheries and see the 100,000 units that are built with public subsidy per year in Chile, at this size of 40 square meters, you see what happens. Most of the families have doubled the initial size to 80. So fact number two, those housing units are going to grow. Fact number three, when you study Scandinavia or even Europe, let's say countries with a relative amount of income, what a social housing unit is around 80 square meters. So it's consistent with the growth, so spontaneous growth of those units. And if you look at the middle class family in Chile, it's around 80. So the only thing we did was looking at the market, what the market is able to do with the subsidy. They do two things: displace and reduce. Displace to a periphery where land costs nothing, and in that periphery, I'm talking about 70% of the area of the surfaces of our cities, narcos thrive. Because there's just houses, no opportunities. No schools, no healthcare, no jobs, no transportation, no recreation, nothing. So you have to survive in this area deprived of any opportunities. So, in the best of the cases, 40 square meters. But then, the market does two things: displace to that periphery and reduce to that size. So the only thing we did was, instead of repeating what the market was doing, meaning building the middle class house but scaled down to 40 square meters so it looked like a miniature, we said, why don't we look at those same 40 square meters as half of the good house we would have built had we the resources? So when you reframe the problem as half of a good, desirable house, but that we cannot implement with public funding, the key question is, which half do we do? And a public policy is about doing the half that a family will not be able to do on their own. So we identified 5 design conditions that belong to the half that cannot be done good individually. So families knew that what they're getting, and this is what we get in Latin America as a starting point. I mean, this is normal. Our peripheries are made out of that. Not going to go into too much detail here, but let's say somewhere there is the policy, you see is the 40 square meters out, 20 square meters per floor. And the only thing we did is the same shape. So architecture and design is not in the form, but we just left the void so that the expansion could be fast, safe, and cheap. And you achieve that by doing the structure for the final scenario. What is more difficult? Roof, partition wall. And so this idea was kind of a natural channeling of families' resources.
And it also allows each of these families to kind of put their own creative, emotional stamp on the place. I mean, to go back to what you were saying earlier, belonging, not belongings, it gives people a sense of belonging to a community of others who have invested in it.
It's a question of identity, yes. It's a question of belonging, and for belonging is not only your household. The thing we introduced at an urban scale is in between the public and the private, territorial level of grouping that is the collective, around 30 families. 30 families is a number in which you know who is your neighbor, you can agree on things to do, and then keep the agreement over time. Beyond 30, you don't know who's who. And if you're on your own, you're too fragile. So the intermediate scale matters. So in addition to the addition of the second half, for which there's no public funding, this in Mexico, for example. So yeah, the question of creating a community that is more resilient, a group of 30 families has proven to be more efficient to resist narco. It's not guaranteed, but you on your own individually, it's impossible. You can't do that. With a group of 30, you may have a chance.
So thinking about the storytelling theme of this festival, I found myself wondering if there were other thinkers or other artists or people from other disciplines that informed this idea of yours of, participatory building, the idea that you give them half, they write the ending, they do the rest of it. I mean, I found myself thinking about, even something like Minecraft, or video games where the user does a lot of the world building, or fan fiction, where people write stories based on their own other books and things that they're fans of. But I'm curious, have you thought about this issue in terms of other disciplines outside of building?
Well, yes, absolutely. There are experiences, and maybe for the architects in the audience, you may know the Previ Lima example in the 70s, where John Turner was working along the ideas of having people, letting people do their own built habitat. So many of the big names at the time were called to Previ Lima to do a kind of prototype, and then we studied how it evolved. And there were experiences in Chile as well of, in Spanish, the translation would be progressive. Progresivo means that over time, or incremental, over time you achieve something. But the difference is that if you just leave space available, that's not necessarily incremental. Mm-hmm. The way to test if you design something taking into account the square meters that are going to come built by families themselves, the way to verify that is the cost per square meter. So the cost of the first half, it's 1. The cost of every square meter of the second half should be 0.2 or 0.3, not more. If it costs the same, that means that it's not incremental. It's just adding more square meters. So in this particular case, some people at the very beginning, when we started this initiative in 2000 at Harvard University, and then the first project got built in Chile in 2003, many people saying, yeah, but incremental housing has existed for a long time. The only, you may know the term, the sanitary booth, where you provide basic sanitation and then families build the rest. So the only difference here is that you did the sanitary booth just in 2 floors and in front of the plot.
Right.
And that's the whole difference.
Right. Well, you've said, I've read that you've said that people naturally build their own houses anyway, so you might as well give them a good start and let them finish it. But that made me wonder whether this approach, would this work else in other places around the world besides South America? I mean, I think about the United States, where we have an enormous housing crisis. We have, tent encampments of unhoused people in so many of our cities. But we also, I've been reading lately about how a lot of, there's a new popularity of something called adulting classes for American young people who these days grow up not knowing how to hammer in a nail, how to sew on a button, how to change a tire, these basic life skills nobody knows how to do anymore. I just wonder, would something like this work in the United States where nobody knows how to do anything?
Yeah, the problem in the US and in Europe is not the DIY, let's say, lack of knowledge, is regulations. If you're over-regulated, then these things cannot happen. So maybe the solution is that you have to wait until you have a big enough problem. Maybe the problem now is not big enough.
It's hard for me to imagine how this would work with unions, for instance.
With
unions, with societies that have a lot of different kind of trade unions. I would think that could be a block.
So maybe a clarification. Self-construction doesn't necessarily mean that you build the things with your own hands. And maybe this is another clarification that needs to be done. It's very nerdy, but it's a question of policy.
So you become your own contractor, not the person hammering the nails.
Not really. So let me explain how it goes. In developing countries, I'm talking about maybe 80% of the planet, where the housing deficit is 2 billion people, those housing units will be mainly needed in between the tropics. That's where the majority of the household will be needed. In those countries, including Latin America, housing policies are property-oriented. Means that when you get a subsidy, you become the owner of the house. And that means that housing is the biggest transfer of public money into a family asset that a family will ever receive in their life. And all of us, when buying a house, expect that unit to grow its value over time. It's almost the definition of an investment. And housing could be treated and designed to perform as an investment and not just as a social expense. If your housing unit is able to grow its value over time, it's not just a shelter against the environment, it's an economical tool to overcome poverty. And
Right.
This is what we have systematically done. The value of the unit, and maybe this needs to be explained. The subsidy with which we started working is $7,000 per unit, with which you had to buy the land, provide the infrastructure, and build a house. And those $7,000, if you go today and go to buy one of those housing units, the value is $70,000, 7-0. So for that family, it's an economical tool that they can use. Normally, those families, when they can secure ownership, the money they have, whatever irregular money they have, can go into the house because the risk of eviction is not there anymore. So what we normally encounter over and over, we have built maybe 5,000 units until now, It's not that families build their own house, but we train group of workers, local work, that may not be in the construction sector, but maybe unemployed or something. So they come up with a package that they sell to the family that is rather efficient because the void is always the same size, so you can repeat. It's a very efficient package, and with that, the second half tends to happen built by local labor, not by families themselves.
I see. So you're growing wealth for the individual homeowner and also for the nation, which is great. I've just gotten the signal, that a time signal. I think that, why don't we take some questions from the audience, and then I would love to come back to talking about the zero concrete at the Venice Biennale. I think there's some mics around if anyone has questions. I can't see.
No questions.
Well, no questions at this point. Oh, this one right here. In the front.
Hello. Hello. First of all, let me start off by saying a huge thanks for this amazing presentation. I'm also an architecture student, graduating soon, and listening to this is a huge honor. My question is about, not directly correlated to the presentation you just made, but I want to know about your opinion about originality in architecture. Like, for example, these ideas that you have constructed here, they are original, they're out of the box, they have never been done before. And how do you come up with something like this in architecture? Like, architecture has been around for many years, many decades. How do you come up with something that has never been done before, basically? Since we, as architects, we kind of have this huge pressure to create something that is timeless, yet still represents everyday life. That's my question. Thank you.
It's an excellent question, but it's hard to, I mean, it's like explaining your handwriting. I mean, you just do the thing, it's kind of inevitable. But let me give you a little bit of a way around the question of originality. We normally, architects, are trained and educated to produce objects which value comes from being unique. Once in a lifetime kind of thing, never again. So because it's unique, then you are hired. But being my original partner in this initiative, a transport engineer and studying public policy, so a complete different mindset. For him, something that cannot be repeated has no value. So it's the opposite. And in here, what we were trying to do is to identify what is something that within the set of constraints of a policy can be repeated as many times as possible and take out the excuses from the market for why not doing it. So at the very beginning, how we came to the design, I guess it was in the quality of the question that we designed. With the right question, I guess that the outcome kind of inevitable. If you're able to design a question to create an inevitable outcome, more than originality, what you're caring is about precision and pertinence. Well, in any case, when we started and people looked at the first project, I mean people, politicians, and builders and real estate developers, were saying, no, this is impossible. With $7,000, you cannot do but what we're doing right now. So when we built the first project, then they said, yeah, but this is in the north of Chile. In the desert, it doesn't rain. So we went to the central Chile, where it rains a lot, and then we did this kind of pitch roof houses. Yeah, but that's a small town. What about the big cities? So we went, and in Santiago, in the richest neighborhood, we built some housing, creating efficiency in the land use so that we could pay for expensive land. So then the question, yeah, but there is flat land. What about the slopes where normally the slums are? So there kept on appearing the excuses for the market to resist change. So I think resisting change is more important than originality. And at some point, the only excuse was, you know what? Design is architecture, the architect fee is too expensive. So that's why after the 2016, the Pritzker Prize, all the most successful designs are for free online to download in CAD files. So one excuse less. And there will keep on appearing the excuses. And the point is, I guess, that to corner and be able to multiply whatever is a possibility or a contribution as many times as possible.
Well, let me get back to you in a second. We were talking earlier, speaking of architectural training, how at architecture schools these days, there's even a discussion, like an ethical discussion, about whether it's even right to try to build, given, the how bad it is for the environment, building materials, just the tax, how much taxes the environment, new building, which is such a kind of a crazy idea in the face of the worldwide housing shortage. And so this is a good lead-in for you to talk about this innovation with this new zero carbon concrete. And then we'll get back to your question.
But I think I can make it really short. I mean, we found that particularly in Europe, there's this kind of dilemma, Shakespearean dilemma, to build or not to build. Meaning that if you build with the current building methods, the carbon footprint and the harm on the environment, it's too big. But then if you don't build, then we have the social ticking time bomb accumulating, and then that's the perfect scenario for narcos to take over. So how do you go out of this catch-22 situation? And of course, incrementality is a way out. So against the scarcity of money and time, you come up with an open system that over time will be able to achieve the standard that you cannot deliver with public funding on day one. But the second one is innovation, science. And there's this Holcim, the Swiss company, that in the Venice Biennale, so this is 1 month old, for the first time produced this net zero concrete. So with biochar technology, it's a concrete that is able to capture and sink in the mass of your solution 3 kilograms of CO2 per every kilo of cement. So if more research and development of different industry come up with solutions that are able to go out of the checkmate situation, then we may have a chance. This is the case of this prototype we built on a 1-to-1 scale in Venice, trying to address what is almost impossible to be built in a different material, and that's sanitation. So the sewage, the basic services, I mean, if I want to be sustainable, yeah, I would go for wood, or let's say, or Adobe, but you can't build pipes in wood. So what are those materials in which you may make a difference? And this combination of need, strategic thinking, plus science and design may at least offer another tool to the toolbox, because we have so many challenges that a single tool won't make it.
So this is a question about a completely different strata of society, but I'm curious what you think about all the rebuilding efforts that are happening right now in California after the fires in the Palisades. I mean, what we've seen there are all these houses incinerated that have created a kind of landscape of toxic chemicals and toxic debris, not just because of the building supplies, but because of all of the, Tesla batteries that evaporated when those cars burned. And so not only the idea of all these, all this toxic material floating around there, but should people rebuild on, places where there are going to be wildfires, places in the floodplain, these gazillion-dollar houses built again and again and again? I mean, what do you think about that? Is that just incredibly indulgent and wasteful, or?
So as a general concept, what I would say, because of the experience in other natural disasters that we have had to work with, identify, and the community matters in the identification of these moments of, so that the losses, human losses and material losses, are not in vain. Use the reconstruction to change things that under normal circumstances would have never changed. When you have a city erased by a tsunami by 80%, you may think, okay, is the center of the city in the right place, or should we now liberate the river shore? In normal circumstances, you don't even dare to ask such a question. But when you have a disaster, there's an opportunity there. So maybe the question, not knowing the exact case of the fires in LA, what are those moments that now is the moment to change, given it was erased? And this, I guess, is the kind of it's not coming from architecture necessarily. So somebody has to have a vision. We may contribute to that. But these are moments of creating a more resilient future for the built environment that we still desperately need.
Right. I think unfortunately in communities like that, the real estate is so valuable that no one is going to be able to take that step back and make an assessment like that. I mean, they're all still just fighting with the insurance companies, you know. Shall we get back to your question here?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for telling your story here. Thanks for being here. You spoke about the differences in social housing in Chile and Latin America in general and Europe, and thank you for illustrating it with the photos, right? But if I could ask you just to speak a bit more about those differences so we can learn.
So in the first place, I guess, is the idea that a policy is an economical tool potentially. That's different. If you are building housing and it's state-owned, you're trying to be efficient just with the housing. So it's the shelter dimension. In the developing countries, and again, that's the majority of the world, you have to think of design as a shelter and as an economical tool. That's a very big difference. If property-oriented, then who will add on top of that is not a state, is a family. So individual actions, and this is the role of design, individual actions, even if well-intentioned, cannot guarantee common good. So the role of design, more their creative wrist or the hand or your gesture or whatever, is to channel a force that is much bigger than your own. So the capacity of people of building, and maybe this is the important concept, when more than half of the square meters are built by the people themselves, then people is part of the solution, not part of the problem. When we look at the slum, it's something that we try to avoid, to resist, or to replace. But it's also a sign that despite having no help whatsoever from the state or from the market or from professionals, people is able to put the roof on top of the head and close a wall to put the room. So why not channel that force? And for that is a very different understanding of the big difference between countries that have property-oriented policies compared to countries where housing are state-owned. Regulation matters a lot. That's another thing. And well, you know, in a country that we thought was relatively formal, like Chile, a kind of exception in Latin America, found out recently, a couple of weeks ago, that in between census, 2/3 of the square meters in Chile did not have a building permission. That means that the mainstream is that one. The formal construction is the exception. And this is connected again, it's a question of proportion. What is rule of law? What is law of the jungle? The proportion changed. And this will require a complete different understanding of the codes and of the tools that you may have to use.
You seem you have an incredible sensitivity to the needs of communities, you know, when they're rebuilding, and confidence that they are going to complete their half of the house after you give them the first half. How do you channel the voices of the community into the half that you build? I mean, do you reach out to communities to find out what they want before you do the first half of the incremental housing?
Yes, and maybe like a quick comment, because we were so gracefully toured through the city. The amount of examples that here are at the building scale of a planned intervention of social housing units has been amazing. So there's a lot of lessons that I'm taking back to Chile. There's a lot of knowledge embedded in some of the buildings we saw in these first 2 days. But going back to the issue of the how to engage with the people. So again, we start from facts. If half of the square meters are not going to build by us, it's rather reasonable. So this is not rocket science, that you sit around the table with the people that are going to build those square meters, and let's split tasks. So participatory design, far from being, here you have a pencil or the mouse or whatever it is, how would you like your house, which is completely irresponsible. The first task is, first meeting, I mean, it could be a meeting like this, 100 families, it's kind of a typical size. First meeting, constraints. So what can and what cannot be done with that amount of money? Because if you make a participatory process and you don't manage expectations, then you're creating a real problem there. Second meeting, so in addition to constraints and information, priorities. I mean, families more than nobody can know what's more important to be done on day one and what can be left out. So, and I think we have to stop now. I will make the same exercise that we did in Chile with a group of families because we didn't have money for everything. We either provide a bathtub or the water heater. We cannot pay for both. So public voting, I mean, when I say bathtub, it's because in the bathroom, the alternative is just a shower receptacle. So voting, what do you think was the outcome? What would you vote? What would you have voted here? Bathtub, who's in favor for water heater? Bathtub?
I guess it depends where they live.
So the proportion in our gathering was 100% for bathtub. And the reason, and there are several reasons. Well, first of all, when you take a shower in a receptacle, I don't know if you make the exercise, but you spill everything out, or your bathroom is flooded, and if insulation from the other apartment is not good, you're leaking on your neighbor, and you can create a huge conflict. Number two, in a bathtub, you can wash your clothes. In a receptacle, you can't. You can bath a child. But the main reason, and this is, I think, what's important to understand about the different codes, is that families, in order to apply to a subsidy of $7,000, had to save $300. It took them a couple of years to save $300. So when they entered the house, they had no money to pay for the gas for the water heater. So it was useless. So what the majority of them was doing was taking the water heater out and selling it. When you get the bathtub, there's a public state subsidy for water. So you can have an advantage of the bathtub on day one, which in the other case you can't. So this is knowledge that we had no idea. Families have knowledge. When you have difficult questions, you need knowledge. And they establish a priority. Before doing the water heater, the bathtub. For us, it was more or less the same, but it made a huge difference in the social outcome of such design decision.
So you've learned things like this from them along the way. Now, I think we have time for a couple more questions. If there's some over here, if we have a mic handy.
Hello, and thank you for your presentation. It was amazing. My question is about, you spoke only about private houses. If this methodology of public building can be used for public functions and public uses, for example, some community center, when public can build it halfly by themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe in a different moment, because this is extremely nerdy, but it makes the whole difference. In the policy, if you swallow the whole policy, you understand that the key to success is when you achieve a level of grouping of families in which these more collective functions can be maintained over time. In the policy, there is the social center paid by the policy that you don't take the money out of the unit. But who runs that? So, for example, to place that complex in a place where the municipality can pay for the maintenance was crucial instead of having it in private land. The same thing for the street. If you plan for a street that you know that is going to be maintained, public lighting, garbage treatment taken care by the municipality, then over time it's going to be more successful. But it's a security threat if you have that collective courtyard just open. So as a de facto rule, families close that courtyard with a fence that each of them contributed a small amount of money. So you have a fence, your children play safe. In the summer, you see an inflatable pool that was paid a very minimum amount of money by families, that because it's shared and protected, that pool exists the next day. If you put a pool in the street, it never exists again. So there are measures in which your territorial decisions can have a good outcome in terms of the future life of that neighborhood.
Thank you. I've just gotten the signal that we're supposed to wrap up. So thank you all, and thank you for this incredibly inspiring set of ideas. Really interesting.